Hey, investors, equity matters. Hey, it's Brad from probatehouseguy.com. So I'm actually a real estate investor. I'm also an agent in Georgia, and I specialize in probate and inheritance deals. Been doing it for a number of years. If you're doing your first probate or inheritance deal, maybe you need a little bit of help with the probate and inheritance deal, or if you want to talk to me about maybe being one of my strategic partners, I've got a unique way that I acquire probate and inheritance leads across the country, and I can't be in all places at all times, so I actually need strategic partners throughout the country. So let's talk about that. But let's get into the video today. And today I want to talk about equity matters. And this message is more towards the investors out there. I'm a part of some of the groups out there. There's a gentleman that runs a sort of creative deal subject to group. I'm not going to mention his name. Most people know who I'm talking about. I actually know him. We've been in a mastermind group together. Great guy. But because he's gotten so big, one of the things that's happened is there are a lot of people out there who are only seeing deals through that specific lens, and they are sometimes trying to shove a square peg into a round hole. And what I mean by that is just because you can do a subject to on a deal or whatever doesn't mean you should. And what I mean by that too is that I see a lot of times where these guys automatically think that, hey, there's a low or no equity in this deal, let's subject to this deal. And that's great and all, but at the end of the day, you have to understand as an investor that your equity is your cushion. And if you don't have any equity in a deal, you potentially could be in for a world of hurt if something goes south with that deal. Look, I've done hundreds of deals, and I know that inevitably one or two deals here and there might go south. You're gonna lose some money every once in a while in this business, or maybe you not lose money, but you won't make as much money as you thought you would make if you're buying the deal right and if you have enough equity. Equity forgives all sins, okay? So we're in a weird place in the market right now. The market's very frothy at the moment, and we thought we were at a peak. It kind of went down about a year ago today, and then sort of prices went back up. We're still in a supply crunch, which is what's kind of keeping prices steady. If you know anything about the laws of supply and demand, you know that prices will pretty much stay steady if the supply is low and the demand is high. If the demand goes down a little bit, but supply is still low, prices might come down just a little bit. But the problem area is going to be when supply goes up and demand goes down. That's when you're in for a world of hurt. And you know, they always say you need to save up and have a rainy day fund. Well, you need to look at your equity and your property as your rainy day fund. And what I mean by that is if something happens, shit hits the fan, whatever, and you need to sell that property, if we happen to be in a downward cycle in the marketplace, so right now, let's say you're buying a property today, and one would argue we're probably at a peak today. So if you buy today at basically a deal with almost no equity in it, what happens 3, 4, 5 years from now when the market actually goes down a little bit and the property values are less and you need to sell that property? How are you going to sell the property if you have no equity into it? Look, I learned this firsthand, okay? In 2007, before I ever got started in the real estate business, I bought my first house. I bought my first house in 2007. I was 21 years old. I was working a corporate job, and I had a girlfriend at the time, and we were tired of renting, and we wanted to buy a house. I bought the house only in my name. Don't ever buy a property with your girlfriend, because we later broke up a few years later. And fortunately, the house was all in my name, and that made things a lot easier in the breakup. But don't ever buy a house with your girlfriend, because I know people who've done that, and it caused a world of hurt for them later, but that's a different conversation. So I bought a house in 2007. And what happened at the end of 2007, early 2008? The market crashed, right? So all of a sudden, this house that I paid $170,000 for was now worth about 130, 125, 130, according to the comps in the neighborhood. Actually, one of my neighbors sold their house for as little as $115,000. That was the lowest sale ever in our neighborhood. So I was stuck in this house. Actually, during that time period, I lost my job in 2009, and I was offered a job to move to another state, but that would have meant I would have had to sell my house. That also, I could have rented the house out, but based on rent comps at the time and what my mortgage payment was and my interest rate was, I would have actually lost a little bit of money every single month renting the house out. So I chose to stay. It was a wise choice, but I stayed in that property for a number of years. And ultimately, finally, I sold that house in 2015 for just a little bit more than what I paid for the house. I sold it for basically $170-something thousand, and I paid $170,000 for it. So it's kind of break even, less whatever improvements I made into it. But also I had paid down the mortgage a little bit, so I did get a check at closing because I had some equity in the property. But I learned the hard way about equity and why that matters. Because when I bought the house in 2007, I got a 103% mortgage or whatever, or 105% mortgage. I did a 5% conventional, but through the builder that I bought through and all these equity programs and I basically didn't have to come to the closing table with any cash. So essentially I had negative equity from the start, right? So that, and if any of you have ever been in a car situation where you have negative equity, which ironically, there's a lot of people I see in these subject to groups that are trying to sub to their cars now because they bought a terrible deal and they paid too much for a car and they got a terrible interest rate on it. And now they're upside down on their loan and they're trying to unload their bad mistakes on someone else. Okay, I find that kind of entertaining, but part of making mistakes is you need to own up to your mistakes, accept the fact that you made a mistake, take your licks, and move on. So let's get back into equity. Why equity matters. So I just mentioned that case. But when you're buying investment deals, that's a whole nother world. And then when you're buying investment deals subject to, you are messing with someone else's credit. You are messing with the seller's credit if 3, 4, 5 years from now, we're in a down cycle and you have to unload that property. What happens if you give it back to the bank because you can't afford it anymore? Well, guess whose credit gets ruined? The seller's credit that you kept the loan in their name and you bought it subject to, and you just ruined their credit. But 5 years ago, you told them you were going to save their credit by taking over their loan and making their payments, and everything was good until it wasn't. And then when it wasn't, you were stuck. But if you had had some equity in that property to begin with, you could absorb it. Maybe you could have sold it for break even. Maybe you would have lost just a little tiny bit amount of money. Or maybe you could have fire sold that property and actually walked away with a check at the closing table. And the reason that was the case is because you had equity in the property. So you need to make sure you are buying deals with equity. I know some guys out there preach about doing deals with no equity. That's great. That's not for me. To each his own, whatever you want to do. But I'm here to tell you that when shit hits the fan, equity is going to save you. And if you have equity in that property and you, for some reason or another, need to fire sale that property, you can fire sale it if you have equity in it. So make sure you're always thinking about that in all of your deals. I personally will not do a deal unless I have some equity. Even owner financing deals, when I pitch a seller finance deal to a seller, the most I'm willing to offer to a seller on a seller finance deal on a long-term note, if the seller is willing to carry these terms long-term, I will go up to 85% of the as-is value of the property. That's how I look at it. I'll look at what I think the as-is value, the ARV, and I'll basically take 85% of that, and that's what I'll offer the seller on a seller finance thing. I need that equity because if something happens, I've got to have some equity in that property. For instance, let's say the market goes down 10% and you were at 90%. You bought a 90% deal. Well, guess what? Poof, all your equity's gone, just like that. So what are you going to do? All right, guys, I hope this video helps. I know it's a little bit of a long video, but I think it's an important topic. And I think that anyone, whether you're an experienced investor or an aspiring investor, you need to be paying attention to that because equity matters. So again, I'm Brad from probatehouseguy.com. I mentioned I have a unique way of doing probate and inheritance real estate deals, and I'm looking for strategic partners in each market throughout the U.S. I do this marketing all across the U.S., and I can't be everywhere at all times. So I actually partner with 1 or 2 strategic partners in each market, and they are my go-to person to run all of the deals in that specific market. So if you're interested in working together, I need investors and I need realtors. Some of the markets have already taken, some of them there might be availability. So please reach out to me. Go to probatehouseguide.com, fill out the web form there on the website, or you can pick up the phone and just call the number on the website. Be happy to chat with you about that. So thanks again for checking out this video. I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.